Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to be able to talk to you today about the power of pro bono. I'm Lisa Frydman, Vice President for International Programs at Kids in Need of Defense, KIND. Headquartered in Washington, D.C., KIND is dedicated to achieving a world in which children's rights and well-being are protected as they migrate alone in search of safety. Since 2008, KIND has provided high-quality legal assistance to unaccompanied children in the United States through a combination of direct representation by KIND attorneys and by closely partnering with private sector pro bono, including law firms and corporations, to represent children. We developed these partnerships because we understood the tremendous untapped potential of law firm and corporate attorneys to close the greater than 50% gap in legal representation of children in the United States. It quickly became clear that when law firm lawyers and corporate legal counsel receive quality training and close mentorship by an expert attorney, they can and do provide first-class representation that has the potential to change the life of an unaccompanied child by helping them achieve safety, legal protection, stability, and access to their rights. Since we first began this work, we have provided almost 11,000 unaccompanied children with pro bono legal assistance, trained over 50,000 lawyers, advocates, and other stakeholders, and now have 674 law firm, corporate law school, and Bar Association partners. Over 90% of unaccompanied children helped by a KIND pro bono attorney in the United States whose cases reach completion win permanent protection. In short, the model works. Not only does it work, it also provides meaningful opportunities to our pro bono partners, who often share that they find their pro bono cases with KIND incredibly rewarding and even transformational. In 2017, KIND took the model to the UK, where together with UK Law Centre partners, we began working with law firms to provide pro bono representation to children eligible for citizenship or leave to remain, cases for which children are not provided a legal aid attorney as a matter of right, and therefore where children have a significant unmet legal need. KIND UK now has 5 Law Centre partners in London, Birmingham, Islington, Scotland, and Manchester, and has assisted 611 individuals, including 250 children, to achieve legal status and stability. In January of this year, we launched KIND Europe, an initiative in which we're partnering with 4 expert NGOs in Greece, France, and Ireland to train and mentor private sector pro bono attorneys to either represent children on the move directly or to assist the NGO attorneys representing them with a range of legal claims, including family reunification, human trafficking, and asylum, as well as challenging age determinations. We're also partnering with Child Circle, a Brussels-based NGO with deep expertise in children's rights and policymaking, to advance protection and rights for children on the move in Europe. We have witnessed the power of pro bono, working closely with NGO experts to use their legal skills to children. And today, we are here to share the model with you in the hope that we may inspire further growth of this work across the globe. We hope the panel may spark NGOs to consider engaging with law firms to provide legal assistance to children they cannot serve, and interest law firms and corporate legal departments to learn more about what they can do using their legal skills to protect children's rights. Child migration is, as we know, a global phenomenon, and so it takes a global response. And we at KIND believe that creating a global pro bono movement is one key ingredient. I'm honored and privileged today to be joined by our speakers, our NGO partners from KIND Europe and KIND UK, as well as one of our most committed law firm partners. Speaking to you today, we have Philip Worthington with European Lawyers in Lesvos from Greece, Lois Conseil with the Alliance of Advocates for Human Rights from France, Siobhan Johnston with Immigrant Council of Ireland and the Irish Refugee Council, Ethna Lynch with A&L Goodbody in Ireland, and Sue Ben of the Central England Law Centre from KIND UK. While I could rave about each of these speakers and their organizations for hours, in the interest of time, I'm instead going to direct you to the PILnet conference website where you can find each of their biographies. And just briefly, I'm going to turn to a couple housekeeping matters, and then we'll open the panel and start talking directly to our speakers. So as you've noticed, there's a chat box in the platform in Hopin, and we encourage you to please enter any questions or any comments you have at any point during the presentation. We'd love to hear from you. We will do our best to answer questions during the session, either live or otherwise in the chat box. If we don't get to one of your questions, please feel free to reach out to any one of us on this panel. I'm sure everyone would be interested in following up with you. And finally, even though we can't be in person, which is obviously a disappointment to all, this is as good as we're going to do. So we would really love to know who's with us today. If you would just take a minute and put your name, your affiliation, and something that you'd hope to get out of this session, something you hope to learn in the chat box, that would be really helpful to us, so we can all feel a little bit more like we're together in the same room. So time to get started with questions for our panelists at this point. Unaccompanied and undocumented children have myriad legal needs, as we know. Let's talk about how pro bono can respond to the most common and most pressing of these needs. Phil, can you tell us about a few of the most pressing needs the unaccompanied children that Allele sees are experiencing, and why and how you partner with pro bono attorneys to assist them?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Lisa. And thank you very much for the invitation to take part in today's panel. So in Greece, particularly on the Aegean Islands, the legal issues for unaccompanied children begin on the day of arrival, because as soon as children arrive, they're registered, and they may be registered either as unaccompanied children or as adults. And obviously there are different legal pathways and needs accordingly. So there's therefore an urgent need for effective access to legal assistance from the date of arrival, particularly, of course, due to the well-documented terrible living conditions for asylum seekers on the Greek islands, which means that unaccompanied children should be identified and moved to suitable accommodation as soon as possible. However, the issue is that there's only a handful of NGOs and lawyers working with unaccompanied children, and the number of unaccompanied children is great. So only 6 months ago, there were more than 1,100 unaccompanied children on Lesbos alone. Moreover, all unaccompanied children fall under the responsibility of the public prosecutor, at least in the beginning, and there is no state-provided legal aid for unaccompanied children. So to seek to address this need, European Lawyers in Lesbos works with a team of Greek asylum lawyers, volunteer European asylum lawyers, and pro bono lawyers. And the pro bono lawyers all come from 6 firms, which is Oric, Dentons, Allen & Overy, Ashurst, White & Case, and Charles Russell Speechlys. And the volunteer European asylum lawyers and the pro bono lawyers work together under the supervision of the Greek lawyers. And working with pro bono lawyers and volunteer European lawyers in this way enables us to significantly increase our capacity and ultimately provide more legal assistance to more unaccompanied children. The lawyers work on all key legal aspects of relating to unaccompanied children, so particularly providing legal information, assisting unaccompanied children with their asylum claims and family reunification applications, and assisting with age assessment for those children who have been registered as adults. Our lawyers explain the legal process, advise children on their rights and about their case, gather evidence, submit documents, and submit supporting submissions, and where relevant, represent the children, all of which of course takes place within strict timescales, as is particularly applicable on the Greek islands.
Thank you, Phil. Lois, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the relevance of children's needs in the local context to developing pro bono programming.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you all for being here. And thank you, Lisa, of course, for this opportunity. I think to respond to the situation of unaccompanied minors, it is important to know the national context, but it's crucial to know the local context and the specific needs of the children that you will be working with. And knowing the environment, the actors that are working on this field, will allow you to better adapt to the situation and also to identify prospects for pro bono action. Indeed, sometimes the biggest issues are also the ones on which they get the most assistance, and your added value may be to work on other issues and maybe smaller issues, but it's still the best way to help. For example, in France, we have a system of legal aid that is established, but it does not cover every situation. So there are significant needs that minors can have that are not met and that can be met by pro bono lawyers as a complement to the existing system. If we talk about the French context a bit more, there's a large proportion of unaccompanied minors who are assessed as adults, as Phil mentioned for Greece. In France, the data is not precise enough, but we can evaluate at around 60,000 to 80,000 minors on French territory, and around half of them are recognized as minors. So you see, this topic is critical, but at the same time, it's the most identified one, and numerous lawyers already work on these kind of procedures. On the contrary, there is a gap on many other issues, such as asylum applications, residence permit application, and it really is a relief for the children and also for the social workers when lawyers get involved in this kind of topic. And it can even be a discovery sometimes because, for example, in France last year, only 750 children claimed asylum. So you see there's still a lot of work to do. Of course, it's always a work in progress, and I'm sure it's the same for all the partners. But having this clear vision on who does what at the beginning of the project in the local context makes your involvement more relevant. For example, one activity that came up lately is the assistance of minors in remote areas where the associative fabric is weaker, but the legal needs are dire. So through partnerships with NGOs working on the ground, we are able to work on these cases and to try to improve the living conditions of the minors with different tools, with guidance, with legal support, sometimes with legal action. And you see it's very different from accompanying a child directly in this procedure, but it's a need that has been assessed lately. So my point is there are many, many different activities that you may undertake, but what we try to do is to find a spot where you will definitely make a difference. And I think that's how pro bono lawyers will be extremely useful in this context, and also will find a better sense of accomplishment.
Thank you, Lois. Siobhan, can you talk to us about how to find a match between children's needs and the pro bono community's comfort zone in your particular context in Ireland?
Yeah, thanks very much, Lisa, and thank you for having me here. Yeah, in the Irish context, there's definitely already a good culture of firms providing some form of pro bono assistance. In terms of the kind project in Ireland, the firms involved have a varying level of experience undertaking pro bono work. So some of the firms involved have a really established pro bono culture already within their firms. They already have a wealth of experience providing end-to-end casework in various different areas, such as asylum and housing. Whereas for other firms involved in the project, kind is the first time that they've actually undertaken any form of kind of pro bono work. Needless to say, there's definitely a huge amount of enthusiasm, all the pro bono lawyers wanting to get involved and take on work in an area of law that they would otherwise never have exposure to. In terms of finding the right match between the readiness of the pro bono community and needs of the children, it was felt in Ireland that the most urgent need was in relation to family reunification for unaccompanied minors. So approximately 175 unaccompanied children arrive in Ireland every year, and many of those have left families behind in countries impacted by conflict. Whilst Irish law does provide for unaccompanied minors to be reunified with their parents and minor siblings, there is no state-funded legal aid available for these applications. And we would say that this is an area really where the assistance of a solicitor is vital. The applications can become very complex very quickly. There are strict deadlines for submission and a large amount of supporting documentation required. Young people must submit their applications within 12 months of receiving status, and often this is not long enough for them to trace their family members. The definition of family member in Irish law is also really narrow. For example, it doesn't cover siblings over 18 or young persons that have been adopted informally into the family. It's really difficult to overstate the importance of family reunification to unaccompanied minors. The right to family life is obviously a fundamental aspect of international human rights law and Irish constitutional law, and having support from their family in Ireland is hugely important in helping them to deal with the trauma of their experiences, and in terms of their well-being and integration into life in Ireland. So it was felt that this was an area where the pro bono firms could basically build the capacity of the Irish Refugee Council and Immigrant Council of Ireland to meet the legal needs of unaccompanied minors.
Thank you, Siobhan. That's great. And Sue, drawing on Kind UK's nearly 4 years of working with the model, what would you advise our participants about how to build solid partnerships between expert NGOs and pro bono partners?
Okay, thanks, Lisa, and thanks for inviting me to be here. Well, in the UK, we're working with undocumented children. So those are children that are actually resident in the UK, and over half of them were born here. So we're not actually working with children on the move. But one of the problems that we have is that those children are often hidden, either because they're unaware that their immigration status is insecure, or they're scared about placing themselves and their family at risk if they come forward for help, or they may be unaware that they've got any route to secure status. So although there are about 215,000 of these children in the UK based on the last research, the first thing that's critical to our model is that we work with NGOs who are known and trusted in the communities that they're based in, because that's the route for us to reach the children. So as Lisa said earlier, we have a collaboration between 5 NGOs in the UK, 2 in London, 1 in Birmingham, 1 in Manchester, and 1 in Glasgow in Scotland. So between them, we've got kind of national reach, but critically, they all have established relationships with the migrant communities where they're based. The second issue really is that many of these undocumented children are living in severe poverty, because being undocumented has a significant impact on their daily life. And when they reach 18, the impact magnifies in that they are restricted in working, they are unable to rent properties, their medical treatment is also restricted, and they risk being deported, often to a country that they've never been to. So pro bono help for these children is vital. There's no legal aid for this casework, and the families that the children are part of can't afford to pay very often for expert advice. So the other side of our partnership, the pro bono firms, what's critical is the willingness of the partners to take on end-to-end casework, and their commitment to understanding and responding to the really difficult situations that the children are in. When we began, which was in 2017, seems a long time, end-to-end casework in the UK in the pro bono world was quite rare, and so building confidence that it was possible to take these cases on was vital. And our 2 pioneering firms, Allen & Overy and DLA Piper, were critical in that and sharing their experience with other firms. The way we make it work is that the NGOs employ expert immigration lawyers who are skilled in working with children and young people. And we provide high quality support to the pro bono lawyers all the way through the case. Kind UK's now got 15 law firms that we're working with across 22 offices. We've trained over 500 lawyers, over 300 of which have taken more than 1 case. And Lisa gave you earlier the numbers of people and children we've helped, with 250 children getting secure status. I think a really strong mark of our success is that we have one of our pro bono lawyers is about to take on their 12th Kind UK case.
Thank you, Sue. It's really impressive. It really shows how it works. Lawyers coming back for more cases, the numbers you've been able to help, and the growing partnerships since the work started. So one of the concerns that we commonly hear from private sector lawyers is that they lack expertise in immigration law, and this is sort of exactly what Sue just mentioned. I just want to talk about it a little bit more. So let's talk about that, about how NGOs can support pro bono lawyers to provide effective representation. Ethna, and for all who are on, Ethna is not going to be able to have her camera on, but she is very much with us from A&L Goodbody. Ethna, can you tell us your perspective on what pro bono attorneys need in the way of training and mentorship, and what's worked for A&L Goodbody attorneys?
Sure, thanks very much, Lisa, and hello to all my fellow panelists and everyone on this discussion this morning. My camera's off because at the moment it looks like the Blair Witch Project, and I know we're coming up on Halloween, but I don't think any of us needs to see me in that state. I'm really glad actually that I've had an opportunity to really hear everything that Sue, Siobhan, Lois and Phil has said, because essentially the one thing that I would like to get across this morning is that strong partnerships are so incredibly important. It's so important with the NGO that you work with that they have the capacity to support you, not only, I suppose, to get engagement within the firm, but also to develop your curriculum. So in our experience, when Kind made the decision to pilot and to come to Ireland and to set up this project, they worked very hard to identify legal rights organisations such as the Irish Refugee Council and the Immigrant Council of Ireland. And I suppose in addition to the training that those lawyers have provided, they're very open and they're very willing to do roundtable discussions. So it enables not just A&L Goodbody, but the other law firms working in Ireland, such as Arthur Cox and Simmons & Simmons, really, I suppose, for us to learn from each other, because we're all working on similar cases. The final point that I'd make here is, what Sue had said was around end-to-end casework. I certainly think that is a step that us as law firms should be taking. We have many, many talented lawyers in our firms. And I think with the right supervision and that support, we are able to do that. And certainly in our case, we have the approach we take is end-to-end. However, even with that, Siobhan is always available and certainly is there to guide the initial consultation, and is there certainly this year during COVID, when we really have had to pivot how we approach our work, our understanding of the Department of Justice. So that's been really crucial for us to be able to continue the work, but also to continue it with the same level of impact as we were prior to all of our worlds being turned upside down in 2020.
Great, thank you, Ethna, and it's so helpful to hear really what the law firms need. You did mention this, but going back, maybe a little bit deeper. So with the 4 years of experience with Kind, nearly 4 years of work with Kind UK, what can you share about lessons learned or best practices with regard to training and mentorship of pro bono?
Okay, probably just to give a bit of technical content, we have two models for pro bono in Kind UK. One is where the law firm owns the case, and the pro bono lawyer is supported and supervised by our expert immigration lawyers. And the other is where the pro bono lawyer volunteers for the NGO and still gets the same supervision and support. We're really flexible and we will use whichever model the firm prefers. And what we've learned is really the training and support for either model is very similar. The bigger variation across our work is in the casework we do, and we do really two main kinds of casework. We're either helping children apply for citizenship, which, if they meet certain criteria, is a legal entitlement. And so in the main, those cases are more straightforward. Not always, there can be complications in proving the entitlement, but in the main, they're more straightforward. The other route that we're supporting children to get their immigration status resolved is through 7-year settlement route, which is a discretionary application. And it can open up opportunities for whole families to get their immigration status sorted on the back of the child being helped. So those cases on balance tend to be more complicated and can take longer. So what we've learned, and people have said this already, is critical is to match the type of work to both the culture within the firm and their appetite, and specifically to the appetite of the lawyers. We find that some lawyers really, really like doing the more complex stuff, and others actually don't. They want to do something more straightforward. So that's our first step in getting it right. I think the second thing we've learned is about our training. And what we know is that our pro bono lawyers are smart people, and actually we don't need to focus particularly on the substance of the law. They can easily understand that, and we support them as the case moves forward and they're learning as the case evolves. What we focus on is the skills and approach that you need to work with children and young people. And one of the things we've done in our training is we made a film with a group of young people who wanted to explain to their pro bono lawyers what they hoped for in their relationship with the lawyer, what was important to them, why it's so critical for their future, and how that relationship of trust can be really empowering. I suppose lastly, the thing we've learned, and it's been said again by Ethne, is that supervision is critical. All of our supervising lawyers, that is their only job. They are expert, they're professional, they're available and they're flexible. And the feedback we've had from the firms is that our supervision stands out, and that's really what's enabled us to build enduring and successful partnerships.
Thank you, Sue. I just have to say, you know, it is for participants that just the expertise on this panel and how to do this kind of work and how to do pro bono and how to do this as an NGO, how to work with the law firms really comes, I think, so strongly through. And so we'll keep, you know, sort of reiterating throughout this panel that our speakers are available for conversations post and on the side, and you know, the organizations are all available to talk through how to set this up in your context. So with that, I'll turn to Siobhan. Can you tell us about a little bit about the ongoing training and support that the Immigrant Council of Ireland and the Irish Refugee Council provide? Siobhan?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So as Sue touched on, knowledge of the legislation is one thing, but it's really not the most important aspect of our training. I think it's fair to say that attending an appointment with a lawyer can be daunting prospect for anyone, but particularly for children and young people. So in our model, training is always provided at the outset. A lawyer takes on a case on how to provide child-friendly legal advice, in particular to unaccompanied minors. So in our initial training sessions with firms, we've included training on key principles, such as ensuring that the voice of the child is heard throughout the process, and that the child's best interests are really central to every case. For example, in the Irish context, TUSLA and the social work, they're often actually officially instructing the lawyers involved for when it's minors under 18. But it's obviously essential that the young person is involved centrally throughout the case and in all decisions made in their case. We also, for example, invited the team leader of the dedicated social work team that works with unaccompanied minors to provide a bit of background on the typical journeys young people have getting to Ireland, and to provide an overview of the support that was given to them by TUSLA or social work. On a more kind of practical level, we hold training on sort of considerations for when having first meetings with young people. This can be as simple as just the setup of the room, ensuring that their guardian is present and sat next to them in the room, dressing down a little bit and dressing more informally, and holding meetings at a time of day that fits in with their school timetable, for example. We also highlight just simple things at the outset, like the importance of explaining the role of a lawyer, making sure that the young person is aware that the lawyer is independent for any kind of immigration official, independent from social work, and working for them. Also stress the importance of plain English as far as possible, using plain English in meetings and letters out to young people, and to making sure that they always have the opportunity to ask questions and clarify their understanding of the advice that's been given to them. But yeah, as was touched upon earlier as well, really one of the most vital things is just ensuring that there's supervision to the pro bono lawyers throughout the process. We would always offer to attend the first meeting with a client, which can help with a bit of continuity, that there's a face that the young person has already seen in the appointments. And it can be helpful, obviously, for the pro bono lawyers to know that there's that support throughout the process.
Thank you, Siobhan. And Lois, the Alliance and outside experts to supplement your trainings for pro bono attorneys. Can you tell us more about that approach?
Yeah, I'll just be talking a few elements about the training overall, and then I'll get into it. based on the feedback that we got from our volunteering lawyers, the one thing that they appreciate the most is to get advices from lawyers who already took on cases, and also from experts, from field expertise. So that's basically how we built our trainings. It's some kind of a mix between lawyers' experience and field expertise. For example, lately we organized a training on residence permits. So we had someone from a partner NGO, a legal assistant, and we had a lawyer from a law firm that is very involved in the program, and they delivered the training, and that was very useful for all the newcomers. That really gives a sense of reality and, of course, of the extent of the commitment for pro bono lawyers. It's also the basis for the creation of links between the NGOs and the law firms. And I think it's critical when it comes down to the cooperation afterwards in the cases. Finally, it's also about ensuring a high quality training by covering most of the matter, and I believe it's really reassuring for newcomers. Of course, those trainings are important, but we don't abandon our lawyers with their cases afterwards. A huge part of our work, as Siobhan said, is to give them indications, to give them support when needed, and to create roadmaps and tools for all types of legal procedures to help them. But at the same time, I think it's very important, and it has been said before, but it's crucial to give indications on other topics, such as intercultural issues, about child psychology. The participants, of course, they won't become experts of the matter in a 3 hours training or in a full day training, but it will definitely influence the way they will apprehend their discussions with the child. It's not always easy to make lawyers take some time for non-legal trainings, but it's clearly a valuable asset when it comes down to talking about the future of the child and assessing his best interest and working for his best interest. For these trainings, we rely on experts, on psychologists, on UNHCR, on sociologists, and really from our experience, they are very interested in training new volunteering lawyers, training people interested by pro bono assistance, because these lawyers are not specialized, but they want to commit, and that's really something that is very interesting, especially for UNHCR, that is a partner on our project. Reaching out to these bodies is sometimes a challenge, but it will give an important added value to your trainings, and it will give you also new perspectives and on the subject, and it can be very interesting to confront experiences, because of course lawyers won't have the same ideas as UNHCR, as social workers who can be involved too. So really do not hesitate to try and reach out to these specialized bodies, to UNHCR, also to social workers from NGOs, from the child welfare services. They will be able to provide help during your trainings, and they may also be very useful later in the development of your project.
Thank you, Lois. I think that's so helpful and interesting for folks to hear about the sort of range that you're training on. Let's take a few minutes and answer some questions from our participants, from those who are listening in, and then we'll turn back to a couple more questions from me to the speakers. And so I'm just going to pull out some questions from the chat that I'm seeing. So the first one is from Andy. It's directed to, and hi, Andy. It's directed to Lois and Phil. And they're asking whether pro bono firms help, or he's asking whether pro bono firms help challenge the age assessments, even when they're urgent, and if those are challenges to medical assessments. So Phil, do you want to start?
No.
Sure. I'm not sure how long I've got to answer this question, but however long it is not long enough. Age assessments are one of the most complicated and difficult legal issues on the Greek islands, and yet bono lawyers do assist with that. And actually this is something that we'll touch on slightly later, which is about the difference between the pre-corona and, I was going to say post-corona, but I suppose we're not post-corona, the during corona time, because that work has changed a little bit. In the pre-corona times, yes, the pro bono lawyers who are on the ground with us would assist with any type of case under the supervision of one of the Greek lawyers. So that may well be age assessment cases. And actually, in some cases, they are the ones, as you say, that because it's so urgent, kind of a lot of resource needs to be devoted to it, because it's a kind of a joint legal and medical issue There is a medical assessment, at least there should be, but the legal rules around it are extremely complicated. And more as well, on a practical basis, it's very difficult for an unaccompanied minor, say a 16-year-old from Afghanistan who has arrived on his own and has been assessed as an adult. It's very difficult for him to challenge that age assessment, or to even know actually what's going on, never mind to actually challenge it without legal assistance. And so whilst it is an element of challenging or working as well with maybe other medical actors on the assessment part, there is also a significant legal element to it as well.
Thank you, Phil. Lois, do you have anything you would add?
Yeah, just something about the French context. The urgency is not really something we have in France because I think, well, the age assessment is a two-part procedure. The first part doesn't require the help of a lawyer, but the second part really does. So most of the time we work on the second part with our law firms, our pro bono lawyers, and there's not that much urgency, which actually is a problem because minors are waiting most of the time months before hearing before a judge and getting their minority recognized. So that's really a problem. But it does let us the opportunity to work on these kind of procedures. But as I mentioned, many lawyers are already doing that. So it's really not the most common cases that we have, except when we also work on asylum applications. So it's very stick to the context. So it's a bit complicated. We can talk about it later if you want.
Thank you, Lois. And a question for Sue from Iman Conlin. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Do NGOs worry too much about whether work is attractive to pro bono lawyers, whether it's simple, versus complex, for example? And Iman goes on to say, paying clients don't worry about that.
It's a great question. I think the pro bono lawyers are key to our success. So I don't think we can worry too much about them, actually. Critical for us is we really benefit if lawyers will take more than one case because they become more expert and more competent. The level of support they need is significantly less. So we do think it's important both to match them well and for them to have got some satisfaction out of doing the case because we want them to come back.
And we have a couple questions we have a question from Una O'Sullivan at Microsoft. And hi, Una. And it's about COVID and the impact of COVID. We're about to address that in a question, but why don't we just go to it now? I mean, I think we can just go ahead and go to it now. So I would have asked speakers, and Una has done it, really, what's the impact of COVID on doing this pro bono work? Phil, would you be able to talk about any changes that you've had to put in place? What has had to shift with your model in the pro bono context as a result of COVID?
Yeah, sure. As has been said, obviously, the COVID situation has, I suppose, significantly changed everybody's work, but particularly for us, because when we began our partnership with the 6 firms just over a year ago, back then, obviously, it was based on pro bono lawyers going out to Lesbos and providing assistance on the ground, and clearly this has had to change. Now we don't have pro bono lawyers coming out in person, and so we work very closely with the firms to adapt the model. And now, instead of lawyers coming out to Greece, we have a program of remote secondments. So under this new model, there are always 2 pro bono lawyers on remote secondment to European lawyers in Lesbos for periods of 2 weeks at a time. And in addition, we have a group of pro bono lawyers from these firms who are available to provide remote assistance on an ad hoc basis. In combination, we have a group of around 15 volunteer European asylum lawyers who are providing assistance remotely, and they often work very closely with the secondees. So developing this new model has been very important to ensure that the critical legal assistance continues to be provided to unaccompanied children during this difficult period, because of course the asylum procedure and all related procedures have been carrying on. So this has of course come with some additional challenges. There is different training that's needed, and there's kind of novel organizational and technological challenges. So, things like ensuring the room is set up, everybody can hear each other, everybody can see each other, everybody's connected at the right time, which is particularly difficult if you've got two lawyers dialing in to the same consultation. And we've learned that clear and structured communication is absolutely vital, particularly for those assisting remotely. But on the flip side, it's also had notable and often unexpected benefits. So, for example, it's meant that the pro bono lawyers have been working more in depth on cases with a greater focus on assisting with the legal consultations. And this is because under the old model, when people were in person, they would work on a large number of cases and often assist with ad hoc queries in the camp as well. So now they work more in depth on a smaller number of cases and work closely with the expert asylum lawyers and able to provide more in-depth support and research on cases. And these collaborations also help build solidarity across the legal profession and the exchange of ideas and expertise, which over the last year, for example, we've had more than 60 volunteer European asylum lawyers and more than 50 pro bono lawyers volunteer with us, as well as our team of 5 permanent Greek lawyers. And the exchange of ideas and collaboration between them, even during the Corona period, has been remarkable. So I think overall, we've been very pleasantly surprised at how well it works and how committed and enthusiastic the pro bono lawyers have been, despite it being a different and difficult situation. And I think that it just shows how flexible and effective models of working with pro bono lawyers can be.
Thank you, Phil. That's really, I think, a very helpful response. And Ethna, in terms of the effect of all the changes with COVID, all the impact of COVID on casework for pro bono law firms, with the increase, for example, in remote legal work, and what could you tell us about what law firms can do to prepare for remote pro bono service delivery? And also if you would touch on sort of Una's question about what has changed or the impact just generally of COVID on the law firms.
Thanks, Lisa. I I'd just like to agree with everything that Phil said. I think, yes, like the way we work might be different, but the need is still there. So if I just touch on 3 things very briefly, I suppose for law firms, one thing we're very good at is our internal knowledge. So I would encourage any firm listening to say, integrate what you're doing with pro bono casework with what the firm does generally. So even before COVID descended on us, we started to develop our internal websites. So we have all of our legislation, previous trainings, but something we've now included is we have a COVID hotspot. So every time there's a new piece of guidance from a department or a law centre has issued something, or there's new information, it goes straight into the hub. So our lawyers directly go in there. We've also developed FAQs, thanks to many of my colleagues, where we're able to give information on the life cycle of a file and how that's changing due to COVID. The final point I'd like to make is, just because I don't think it's been raised yet, something that we have done since COVID started, and I've done directly with my own clients, is that we arrange calls with our clients' parents. So we will often speak to mum and dad in the country of origin. I'm working with a young man whose family are still in Gaza. And I think it's important we set out and we explain to them the process, but we're also very transparent and open about the impact of COVID. So to try and assure the family your young person is safe, they're being well looked after, that there will be delays in travel, that we continue to impress on the Department of Justice how important it is that decisions continue to be made. But I think that is an important thing to remember. We're talking about family reunification, and we want to ensure that, the young people that we are working with, that we also have open lines of communications with their family as a legal advisor when we can. And then the final point I'd make is, during COVID, we had invited the law centres to do, I suppose, a reflection, to share their experiences, how has COVID impacted the law centres, but also for them to meet and to, over a virtual coffee and lunch, to talk about the wider policy implications of the work that we're doing. Because I think that is really important. We are, as pro bono lawyers, we're a small part of this incredible machinery that is civil society. And, I just would like to say thank you. I think as pro bono lawyers, we are incredibly indebted to the work that is done day in, day out by our colleagues in social justice organisations. So a big thank you.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways, because NGOs feel exactly that deep gratitude as well to the pro bono partners, because it really is that it's a partnership. That is, it takes the input and the commitment from both sectors. So there's a question from Julia with PILnet. She says she's joining from Asia. NGOs in the Asia Pacific region, are interested to embark on pro bono partnerships, but often feel the initial investment needed on the NGO side is high, as NGOs often do the screening and referrals of provide training, support, and supervision, but often with no additional funding. How do you overcome this challenge? Can you share any advice or suggestions? Sue, I might turn to you there first, if that's okay. Just you've really worked on this issue, and then others, please. I will turn to you as well for those who.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a really important question, I think, because it's not free operating these programs. We have fundraised in the UK. We've secured the support of trust funds and foundations who were equally committed to helping the children that we help, and could see that the model had potential to bring more capacity into the field. And also the firms make financial contributions. So really having some funding is critical. I think I said earlier, the supervising lawyers are employed by the NGOs and it is their full-time job. And obviously we have to pay their salaries. We've got a shared case management system so that we can keep data together. There's some coordination, there's communications that's needed to keep all this going. So there is a cost to it. Fundraising is important, and NGOs probably do need funding up front before they start. And the firm's contribution is a very important facet of that.
Thank you, Sue. Lois, would you be able to weigh in on this, as the Alliance has been working in pro bono model for some time?
Yeah, actually, the thing is, my organization is originally a clearinghouse, so we're working with many law firms, and this program, Unaccompanied Minors, is one part of our activities, and the most important one, actually, in terms of number of requests, is globally the legal assistance to NGOs on other issues such as labor law, for example. So our financial structure, the scheme at the beginning was the membership fees from lawyers, from law firms, globally speaking. So that helped us basically create the structure of the association. So our basis as funding, as long as funding is important, of course, but our basis is the membership fees from law firms. So that may be something to do. As soon as a number of law firms are interested in developing this project, an NGO could, become the platform that may be useful for unaccompanied minors to get assistance. That may be an idea.
And I think Phil might have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, just to echo what Sue said, and just to say that for our project, we also receive funding from the participating law firms, and of course support from kind as well. But I think that as well as the financial element, which of course is a significant consideration, there's also the time element, because it was one of the biggest hurdles that we faced was at the beginning, convincing our Greek lawyers that actually this was a worthwhile time investment, because they were there saying, we're here on Lesbos and, we're drowning in work. And, we don't have time to then train non-expert lawyers to come and it be actually an effective and effective use of time and effective in terms of assistance. I think that's a very difficult thing to convince your staff about when there's no evidence, when you're just starting up. Now, if you ask the same question to the Greek lawyers, they'd have a very different answer, because they've seen that over the last year, 14 months or so, that it is absolutely worth the time investment. And I suppose that, all of the projects here on this panel, I'm sure would have the same viewpoint, and that's, I suppose, the only way of pointing to good examples and good practice examples is maybe a way of helping to convince NGOs who've maybe not done this before about some of the issues relating to the time commitment as well.
Thank you, Phil. Siobhan, anything to add? If not, I'm turning. We certainly have more questions that I'm going to turn to.
I think, yeah, everything that everyone's made very good points there. Yeah.
If I may,
great.
I might just law firm perspective as well. I suppose this, as a firm, we recognise that this does take the resources of NGOs. So when we are developing impact projects, we have a number that we operate in the firm. We do directly provide financial support. And I think for any law firm that's looking to do this kind of work, I think that is important conversation to have with your management committee early on. So in addition to, getting involved in impact projects like this, another aspect I think, given the nature of the work, is that a firm also applies resources for professional interpretation. And again, that's something that we will include in our budget lines, because I think that, again, that's something that, if we're going to do this work, it really is important that it's done professionally. And that does cost money at times, and I think that's just something, for firms getting involved, certainly have those conversations early on. Because I think that is also something that you're bringing your expertise and your pro bono support, but we also are very much working in collaboration and partnership with NGOs, as Sue said, it is their full-time day jobs. So I think it's important that those conversations are had early on.
Terrific. Thank you, Ethna. And we have a question. Judith Geller. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the discussion. I would be interested on how the pandemic is impacting unaccompanied and undocumented children. And does it change the assistance you provide? Sort of that part we've talked about, the assistance and how it's changed, but we haven't talked about the impact of COVID-19 in particular on unaccompanied children and undocumented children. Do you want to, if you're a speaker and you want to weigh in on this, do you want to maybe just raise a hand or unmute yourself directly so we know? Great, Lois, thank you so much. And Phil, I was going to say, you've clearly seen a huge impact on the Greek islands. Lois, do you want to start?
Yeah, just a few elements. It had a huge impact in France because most of the administrations were closed, and as you may know, pretty much every procedures need to be done by the administration. So it was really a huge problem. So we just worked on other issues, mostly remotely, such as issues in northern France, in Calais for Europeans here. So it really changed the way we worked for 3 months during the lockdown in France, and afterwards it came back pretty much to normal as the administrations reopened.
Before you respond, actually, Siobhan, could you take a second in terms of what, at least, what you've seen with the casework, or more broadly, if you want to, pandemic? Great.
Yeah, it's obviously been a hugely stressful time for young people because, as Lois touched on, there was a standstill in applications for months during the lockdown, and that was certainly the case in Ireland. And obviously, there was huge limits on travel, and the family reunification unit, the departments just weren't making decisions for a very long time. So obviously, a huge impact, and as Ethna touched on before, it's just the importance of keeping that pressure on, that decisions still do need to be made, and progressing applications as best you can in obviously very difficult circumstances. But yeah, a hugely stressful time for the young people, definitely.
Thank you, Siobhan. Phil?
Thanks very much. There's been, I suppose, two impacts, significant impacts, which is, first of all, for the new arrivals on Lesbos and the other Greek islands, there is now an additional kind of not so clearly well-defined stage at the beginning. So rather than going straight to being taken straight to registration in the camps, there's now this kind of process of quarantine, which is not particularly clear exactly how it works, but it can mean that unaccompanied children arrive and are in a quarantine for a period which is kind of unpredictable, depending on how many people arrived and the situation and everything else. So there is that additional element beforehand, which again is particularly significant if it may be unaccompanied children along with a group of adults who have all arrived at the same time. Obviously there's protection issues as well as legal. We've also had the same issues with services not being open and the complexities that's caused. And just one example, very briefly, we had a family reunification case of 2 Syrian minors wanted to be reunited with their parents in Germany, and the lockdown happened whilst that case was in process, and actually the result of it was that it was not possible to really move forward with the case, or not easily at least, but the time limits continued to run. So actually in that case, the deadline for submitting the take charge request was missed by 1 day, and that was because it was received and couldn't be then sent by the Greek Asylum Service, the Greek Dublin unit, but then couldn't be sent on to the German Dublin unit because the Greek Dublin unit was closed on the day of the deadline. So they were only able to send it the day after, and Germany said, well, you missed the deadline, so we're rejecting the case. And this was, a Dublin case that would have absolutely normally been accepted. And the net result of it is that, we submitted requests for re-examination and finally actually had to bring a legal case in Germany to resolve the problem, which eventually we did. But it was a hugely more complicated and difficult and of course stressful for the children than it would have in pre-corona times, when it would have been a pretty straightforward case.
So clearly incredibly impactful on their circumstances. And Sue, any thoughts on impact on children in the UK?
Yes, I mean, because we're not working with children who are on the move, some of the complexities that others have described haven't applied to us. What I would say, though, is that the pandemic, and I think this has happened in most countries, has really had a very disproportionate effect on people whose lives were already quite precarious and who were living in poverty. Many of our children are living in families where the parents also don't have status and were getting by, were perhaps working without the right to work. All of their circumstances have really been thrown into disarray, and so the situation that they're in, for many of them, has become more extreme. And I think that's probably why actually we've had an increase in demand for help during and continuing since COVID started.
Makes sense. Thank you, Sue. I'm going to take one last question from the participants and then turn to towards the end of our panel. And this question is about asylum claims. So going back, Andy had a second question, which was appreciate that numbers of asylum claims for children are low, but is there an equivalent of a transfer scheme to places outside of capital cities? If so, if there is such an equivalent, what does legal representation look like? Are these places an advice desert? And does pro bono reach children in those circumstances? So, Lois.
Yeah, that's a very complex question in the French context that will require a very long answer. But I think you're referring, when you say transfer, to the Dublin scheme. In France, there is something that is a bit like that, but it concerns the child welfare services. So once the child is assessed as a minor, he may be transferred to another department inside the French territory. The problem is when you link that to the asylum procedures, there is only one administration in France that is actually looking at the asylum applications, and it's in Paris. So only that is a huge problem, because they need, the child welfare services need to send the child to Paris to get his application looked on, and that's indeed a huge problem. And as regards the legal representation, it's also a challenge, because There are two types, more or less, well, three types, but I mean, most of the time, two types of legal representation in France. I don't know the words in English, but anyway, one type, we lack a lot of this type of representatives, a huge challenge in France and enormous challenge in some departments. So minors just don't get legal representative for a month. And the other one depends on the departments, and it really also depends on their goodwill. So a really huge challenge in France. For some minors, really great. All things are just going very fast, and every procedure is going on, and that's nice. But in many other cases, huge challenge on both parts: the transfer to another department and also the legal representation, and so the launch of different procedures such as asylum.
Clearly complex. I think you did a great job of distilling that briefly, and Andy can also follow up for more. He'll know where to find you. So great. So with that, I'm going to turn back to the sort of last topic that I have for some of our panelists, which is really, let's talk about getting involved in setting up or providing this type of assistance. Why should folks consider doing it? How do you do it? So Ethna, could you talk to us about why pro bono lawyers should get involved? What would be your pitch on why pro bono lawyers should get involved?
Thanks, Lisa. I'm hearing a lot of people say, look, 2020, it's a really challenging year. But I think if I look at it a different way, I think it's a year that's going to present huge opportunity. I'm hearing the phrase bandied around a lot, let's build back better. And I think we're at a crossroads. I think really pro bono can be part of the solution. I think we can work with civil society in partnership so that, you know, when things do turn a corner, that there are not people left behind, you know, so that the widening in society, you know, that we can try and reduce that. There's a phrase that my dad used to always say to me, and I suppose not to be too maudlin, but I think it captures for me what pro bono is all about. And it says, you have not lived a perfect day, even though you've earned your money, unless you've done something for somebody that can never repay you. We're about sharing our skills. It's not in expectation of a monetary gain. It's really about using the position that we are in to really try and make someone's life that little bit better. So I would say get involved. What I have been surprised at this year, even in my own firm, we are doing more pro bono than we've ever done. And I'm seeing lawyers put their hands up that never have put their hands up before. So I think that there really is great appetite. And I think just harness that, but let's do it in partnership so we can build back better.
Great quote, Ethna. In my opening, and I'll say it again. We hear all the time from the lawyers that take cases from us in the U.S. and now, you know, Kind UK has, you know, you heard about the lawyer coming back for his or her 12th case, that just how incredibly rewarding these cases are and how transformational they can be. And I've had lawyers tell me from law firms, you know, that the case that they've taken is really the most meaningful thing that they've done in their legal career. So just to add on there, Sue, could you talk to us a little bit about why you would say, you know, what's in it for NGOs? Why should NGOs go to these lanes, to put in the effort that we talked about to work with law firms to provide legal assistance?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, the work we're doing in the UK is filling a gap that there is no other offer for. So it's an area of work where there is no legal aid and the families can't afford to pay for expert advice. And there are lots of those in the UK, so it's worth thinking about pro bono as a response to that. I'd also say, if you're worried, and I've got to be honest, I was actually worried when we started this, that the pro bono lawyers would have the capacity and the commitment to work on cases where we're dealing with such vulnerable children and young people. I would say our experience has been the exact opposite. We're working with lawyers who are dedicated, who are committed, who get really drawn in when they see the impact that their contribution can make to people's lives. And what I would say, supervising lawyers tell me, we are learning from those pro bono lawyers. We're supposed to be the expert, but actually we have expert lawyers who are coming to a different kind of work with fresh eyes. And quite often that means they might suggest fresh approaches. So for us, it's been a really better than I expected experience, and it absolutely is vital to meet some of the gaps that we have in the UK. So if you're an NGO, I'd say get involved, because you will create capacity that you currently don't have.
Great, thank you, Sue. And that's very much, you know, the numbers that I talked about before, reaching 11,000 unaccompanied children in the United States through legal representation. We would not have been able to do that without the partnership with pro bono law firms. So really, we've had a sort of a multiplier effect in these relationships where we take cases ourselves, but then we also, when we train attorneys at law firms and they're taking cases, and very often we see over time law firms gain in-house, and they're even, you know, providing some of their own in-house training. So it goes even further. Turning to how you can get involved, those who are either listening in today or going to listen to the recording later, pro bono lawyers can get involved in casework with Kind UK. You can reach directly out to Kind UK. You can get involved with one of Kind's local European partners that you've just heard from at Lille, the Alliance of Advocates for Human Rights in France, the Irish Refugee Council, or the Immigrant Council of Ireland. You can also reach out to Kind to connect you if you don't reach directly out to them, or you can conduct research for Kind's EU advocacy work with our partner organization in Brussels, Child Circle, would be another opportunity. So there's casework, there's research to support sort of education and advocacy efforts. So please reach out to us to be connected, and we're happy to answer additional questions that you might have. For NGOs who are listening in, you've heard, I think, a lot of reasons about why it's worth it. If you're interested in learning more about opportunities to partner with Kind or opportunities to partner with pro bono law firms and how to do it, we are very happy to talk more on the side in additional meetings. So please don't be shy, please reach out. At this point, I think, you know, I'm so thankful to all the participants who came today, who listened in, to our really fantastic speakers. I just find them so impressive, and I'm sure that you all did as well. So grateful for your time and your input and expertise. And though we couldn't be together, this was, I think, the second best that we could do. And just to reiterate that our hope here today has really been for participants to learn more about the strength of pro bono when done in close partnership with expert NGOs to address the legal needs of unaccompanied and undocumented children. We are very happy to keep talking about it more again on this side. So feel free to reach out. And thanks once again. Take care.